Well, it's 10:30.
10:30 on the dot.
It's 10:30 on the dot. And meetings start on time here. So good morning and welcome to the all-party group on childcare and early education. My name's Steve Brine. I'm the chair of the group. I'm also the MP for Winchester and Chandler's-Ford in Hampshire. Welcome to all our attendees. Particularly welcome, of course, to Dame Rachel D'Souza, who is the Children's Commissioner for England. We're very pleased to have you with us, Rachel. Thank you. I know we've had a few false starts in fixing today's session, but we're incredibly grateful for your time. We know how busy you are. We, as you might expect, have had a lot of interest for today's session from parliamentary colleagues and from others who support the group. Dame Rachel will be known to many of you. She's, of course, a nationally recognised figure in education, was appointed to the post in December last year, so she likes to come into the middle of a storm. Welcome to our group, Rachel. Confronting the challenges facing the early years sector as we emerge from COVID is no mean feat, but Dame Rachel has extensive experience in turning around failing education settings, and I think this is very much your time, Rachel. Rachel's agreed to speak to us today to outline her priorities for the early years sector, to set out what she sees as the key challenges are, and of course answer your questions. In that capacity, I'll be feeding your queries with Mike from our secretariat. So if you wish to ask a question, please post it in the chat, and the secretariat will flag that to me to raise it with Dame Rachel. When you're called upon, please obviously unmute yourself. Ensure you got your video on, just so that everybody can see. There's very high demand for time. We started on time. We're going to finish on time in 1 hour. If you could just identify yourself and the organisation you represent or the seat that you hold when you ask a question, that would be really helpful. So that's just a bit of housekeeping. If you follow us on Twitter, if you do Twitter, poor you, we're at APPG Early Years. The tweet is up there now. You can tweet with the hashtag CEEAPPG. So Rachel, thank you so much for giving up your time this morning. As I said, you've been in post for almost a year now. It's an incredible year that you've been through. I wonder if you could say a few words, 5-10 minutes or so, and tell us your priorities for the early years sector as our new Children's Commissioner for England.
Thanks so much, Steve, and it's great to be here. Actually, I took up post in March, so it's about 9 months. I was appointed in December, but yeah, right in the eye of the storm. And the early years is absolutely key to ensuring we support children to thrive, both in terms of their education and their well-being. So the first thing I did as Children's Commissioner, and it just simply had to be to listen to children about their experience in the pandemic, what they needed to thrive, ask them what they needed to thrive coming out of the pandemic, and ask them what they wanted for their future. So we put out the biggest survey ever. We got the biggest survey ever response in England, and we think in the world. We put out the Big Ask survey. So it's turned out to be the biggest ever consultation with children, over 500,000 responses, so 557,000 responses. I launched this report with support from government, but also with Marcus Rashford, which I think helped get some of those responses. And I was excited to see the great things that children told us that they care about. You know, they told us they care about their families and how much they value seeing them, whatever form family takes for them. It's a fundamental pillar of children's lives and supports their happiness. Where children were unhappy at home, they told us they were far more likely to be unhappy in general. And as we emerge from the pandemic, I think now's the moment to support the family for all children, and especially the most vulnerable. It was the children in care who told us the most that they wanted the closeness of 1 or 2 adults in their lives. As 11-year-old boy put it, I know not all kids are as lucky as me. I've got very supportive parents who are always there for me, and I can't imagine going through school without them. We wanted to hear from the very youngest babies and children, and because it's not possible to survey those in the earliest years, we spoke to parents and professionals to capture life from their perspective. So we heard about the impact of lockdown on children's development and well-being. Here's a quote: "I can't leave him," a 2-year-old, "in the room with anyone else without him crying. It's been really tough on him. He struggles in relationships with other people, even his dad. That was B, mum of a 9-year-old, a 5-year-old, 4-year-old and a 2-year-old. Another one, my little boy was 9 months old at the start of lockdown. He was starting to crawl and develop lovely relationships with extended family. He's now lost a massive period of his life to get to know them. He's found it really tough and he's not really sociable anymore. That was another mum of a 9-year-old and a 2-year-old. Parents also spoke about the impact of pandemic on their parenting and how they interacted with children and how it could make it more challenging. As one parent said, my parenting has definitely been affected by this lockdown. I snap a lot quicker. I shout a lot more. I've been so overwhelmed by everything that's expected of me. I've had no break. If I'm not working, I've got the children. And that was a mother of 3 children. On both young children and parenting, it's been great to work with Andrew Leadsom and the Education Secretary of State for Children. Their passion in this area is helping to put critical issues at the heart, this critical issue at the heart of recovery from the pandemic. My argument since I came in has been, we need to put children at the centre of recovery from the pandemic. And now it's time to put the family at the heart of government and society. In response to the Big Ask, I published a Big Answer in September. And in this, I call for investment in a network of family hubs and in support for the early years. And I'll ask Emily from my team to just put that that link in the chat if anyone wants to see what we call for. And in the Big Ask, I made the case for what children need to recover from the pandemic and really welcome now then the announcement in the spending review of additional investment of 500 million for families over the next 3 years, including 300 million for Start for Life programme and in family hubs, as well as 200 million for the Sporting Family programme. In particular, I'm pleased to see the pledge for family hubs in 75 areas across the country. And wouldn't it be great if they're everywhere? As well as support for perinatal mental health, breastfeeding, parenting programs and health visiting. You know, I'm less concerned about the physical buildings. We've got plenty of buildings. It's getting the right personnel in those family hubs that are going to really make the difference. And I want to work with government, with the sector, with you, to build on this fantastic investment to ensure support for families continues to get better. We need further reform in this area as well to integrate support for children and families across health, education and care. Now, early education, which is really, I think, one of the key areas we're going to be talking about today, is obviously a crucial element of the puzzle, and we need to place much more attention and focus on it. It's the one place we've got a huge evidence base of efficacy on. And I was just reading the Laws Public Sectors Committee's publication on Friday that we contributed to, which has a great summary of the evidence base there, including the LSE's latest evidence on how investment in this age group just pays dividends massively. It's just a sensible thing to do. So previously announced investment of 180 mil for training for the early years workforce and support for communication needs is very welcome. Recognising the importance of the vital workforce, and the education recovery in the early years is just as important to set children up to succeed in school. In those pandemic sort of months since I've been in, I've been constantly trying to make the case for speech and language support for the earliest children. The debate often sort of landed around examination, kids taking exams at 16 and 18. I think the biggest impact of the pandemic is on earliest children, and we know that, and especially those who were unable to go to nursery. So throughout my tenure as Children's Commissioner, I want to continue to work with the sector and ministers to get the right support in place for children in the earliest years. I think the Big Ask showed us how important this is for children, and I want to continue to work with you to do that.
Thank you very much, Rachel. That's really good. Your enthusiasm is infectious. I really love that introduction from you. So obviously, you set out some of the challenges there that you think are facing our early years, our sector as a whole. I just wondered if you could just touch on what you think is the recipe for a successful and thriving early years sector, in terms of, obviously, what we're interested in is those providers of early education, and how that then fits together with moving into, obviously, reception, which we just touched on, and then moving into Key Stage 1 and Key Stage through their education life. So what is the recipe for that successful early years sector?
Yeah, so I think providers would probably agree with me on this one, that funding is clearly a part of this. I welcome the additional investment that's been made and that my office called for, but we also need, I think, to bring partners together to create a more integrated offer, including maternity and health services. Health is a big concern for me at this age group. Therapists, educators. Family hubs are an excellent model for the provision of joined up services at local levels. I'd also say part of the recipe is better data and a clear focus on outcomes. One of the things I'm trying to prioritise strongly and will be prioritising over the next few years right across the public sector around children, but particularly in this area, is like excellent data and an proper outcomes framework. I think then we're in a far better place to really compare areas and really understand how things have been done, how kids are doing, and have proper accountability. So I think that would also help us ensure that everyone in the sector is clear on their priorities. We can measure progress, identify problems, and make sure children get the right support. So I think that focus on outcomes is key. Of course, that's a separate thing. I mean, I think at the moment we all need to prioritise recovery, and I think that's what's on most people's mind. And ensuring that all that sort of hard work, that people put in and the concerns about the pandemic, we can move on from and get children, where they need to be. But if you're asking me over the coming years, I'd say definitely an outcomes framework, definitely ensuring data and better join up. It concerns me that we've got checks, health visitor checks at 2-year-olds, and then we've got our EYFS checks. They should be joined up. They're not. We need to get health in that picture. So it's that integration, I think, is really key for me.
Thank you. So I just want to touch then, explore some further on the actual educators themselves. So those working in early years. And the parents, because it's a partnership, isn't it, between the early years educators that they spend a lot of their time with, but it doesn't just end when they walk out of the early years setting. I was struck that you said in your opening remarks that parenting, from your survey, parenting impacted so much by lockdowns, because we whether we had primary and secondary age children, as I do, or children in early years, we all felt like utter failures during lockdown in the way that we handled our children. And I just wonder, how has the dreaded pandemic changed the role of early years educators?
Well, I think first of all, I think parents and all of us need to and want to thank early educators just for the immense work that they've done and the immense work they're doing. I think when everybody had to take that role themselves in families, they realised just how much early years educators do. Again, I would say I'm really, really keen on professional development, really good supporting qualifications, supporting CPD for early years educators. As someone who has led schools and a trust of schools with nurseries and early years settings, as well as all the other settings, I was always unbelievably impressed and in awe of early years educators. It's got to be one of the most specialist jobs. So thinking about how the pandemic's changed the role of early years educators, I think it's created a lot of additional pressure on them. I think we need to, as I say, recognise the fantastic job they did during the pandemic, but we need to know, don't we, that babies and toddlers missed out on so many opportunities to learn and interact with others during lockdown, a crucial time in their development. Families lacked access to formal and informal support during this time. Early years providers have had to work with families facing problems like bereavement, a rise in domestic abuse, and I think I've seen, and I travelled the country during the big ask during April and May, so looked at early years settings from Gateshead to Bristol to Scunthorpe to Grimsby to Wythenshawe. I went right around the country and saw the amazing job that early years educators were doing, reaching out to families that were vulnerable and were in difficulty. And that with, as private providers, huge financial pressure on them as well. So I think I've thrown a lot of things in there, but I think to sum it up, what I'd be saying is huge respect for early years providers. Their early years educators more important than ever. My view is that it's those children in the early years that have been most affected. So I think, I'm very much in favour and have argued for support going in for early years educators. Those of us who work in schools know that the most impressive educators are the early years educators, and I think we need to make sure as a profession in education, we really show that group the respect and support they need.
Yeah, thank you. Leslie Udwin posted something in the chat from Think Equal. Are you aware of the Think Equal program, which has been put together by neuroscientists and psychologists, as well as educationalists such as Sir Ken Robinson, the co-founders of the Yale Centre for Emotional Intelligence? Please, may I meet with you to bring this program to your attention? Are you aware of that? And there's a meeting request already for you, Rachel.
Great, and I'd love to meet, especially as I'm much more along the Nick Gibb phonics line. So it would be great to get some really good Ken Robinson early years stuff. What I would say as well, the biggest response, the when we ran, which was the word used the most in those 250,000 written responses from children in the Big Ask. I wonder if you can guess what that word would be, Steve. I'll give you one guess. What do you think it would be?
Gosh, I don't know, Rachel. You tell us.
Play. And I think
is children's work.
Exactly. And I think that's what children have missed out on. And I think that's come through massively on the big ask. And I think we, just being able to get children back together of all ages, but particularly early years, because they learn through play, don't they? As well as,
Yeah, and so the words that keep coming up in our chat, and you would expect this, and I know you're very diplomatic, and but as you go about your role, what are your thoughts on pay and conditions for early years educators? I mean, one person put in here, very good to be in awe of the work of educators, but thank you won't raise their working conditions and pay. Are there any plans for this? You would have expected this already, but you probably would have expected this 18 minutes ago. But it's already, it comes up all the time, and rightly so. I just wonder what your thoughts are on that, what you plan to be saying about that publicly.
Yeah, so I mean, I've always been absolutely clear that really strong training, professional development is important, so that people choosing the early years have opportunities to develop and move ahead, rather than they feel they have to leave the profession. Pay's a key component. I'll always champion the early years sector as part of the wider education workforce, because early years make such a difference. So, I mean, I think, and I think, yeah, absolutely support proper professional development and a proper pay and conditions. And I mean, I was talking to Neil Leach. Neil Leach and I hear from him every week. He's very much a spokesperson of this sector, and I'm going to see some settings with him, because he was raising concerns with me about just how tough things have been and how tough colleagues are feeling in this sector. So I'm going to do a bit of a go around with him and really hear from people themselves in the way that they can speak. But absolutely want to champion pay and professional development in this area. Look at the outcomes that early intervention and early education can give us. It's the one place we know will have an impact at 16. I mean, I've been looking at the kids that failed the EYFS check and what happens to them at 16. And, if I was going to say, let's focus on an outcome, the biggest outcome for me would be that EYFS check, and making sure that staff settings have been supported enough to make sure that children are successful there. It's such a key indicator.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's so important. I declare my interest as somebody who's married to an early years educator who's gone off this morning to do exactly that. And she often bends my ear when we see in the local newsletter adverts for dog walkers that are advertising more per hour than she gets paid. And I think they find that very difficult, understandably. Rebecca Swindell's asked a question. How closely are you working with Ofsted on the less data agenda for early years settings?
So Ofsted work closely with us, but we're a very different. I mean, the perspective of Children's Commissioner is to come from the perspective of supporting the rights of the child and, you know, being the eyes and ears of children. Ofsted obviously are regulating. So we haven't actually had. We've talked. Most of my conversations with Ofsted have been about ensuring children's support as we come out of the pandemic, given where we are. But I'll absolutely look into that. And I meet regularly with Amanda, so I'll have a discussion with her about that.
Great. Samantha from the London Early Years Foundation. What are the plans to ensure that children most in need obtain high quality early years education? You would expect that to come from the LEYF.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've referenced quite a few times in my opening remarks how pleased I am about family hubs. I think family hubs are a critical part of supporting families and young children of this age who are vulnerable. But you know, I think you and I know that yes, there's that, but we also want high quality education. Now, I've run a number of nurseries myself in my own trust, and most, you know, I always try to make sure all our schools had nursery provision in it. So I think we've got a couple of things we need to look at. One is enough provision and enough partnership between, so that we can ensure that areas have enough provision for the early years. And I think that's, you know, there's a mapping job there, because I still find it, you know, I like freedom and diversity in the system, but, you know, we do need to see exactly how, you know, and then have a bit of a view of how that's going. And I think there are also issues about how we fund early years. And I don't want to set everybody off here, because I know you all know this very well, but, you know, there are concerns about like the 15 hours for 2-year-olds, the 30 hours for 3-year-olds. How does that fit across the way?
No, that's not fair.
Yeah, it's not fair. He should have helped me.
No, everybody, I need to listen.
Okay, if you could just mute your family discussion, that would be awesome.
Right.
Interesting as it is for us all, but sorry, Rachel, do carry on.
That felt real, didn't it? But yes, I think there's something about the way we fund early years provision for working parents and the way we fund it for vulnerable parents. And I think we need a slightly better, and the way for more vulnerable parents, it's needing to be paid for up front, and, you know, range of issues there. We could talk for hours about them, but I do think there's something about thinking that through and perhaps coming to a more coherent position. So again, one of the things my office will be doing is looking at that and working with the sector to try to get some sensible proposals to talk to ministers about, not to undervalue how fantastic it is that 30 hours is funded and that 20 hours is funded. I think it's more about what are the barriers being caused by these arrangements, because I think if we could overcome that, it could help early years provision a lot.
And you've turned around 2 schools, haven't you, from being struggling to outstanding? And I alluded to that in the introduction. I just wonder what key skills you look to then be instilled in the under 5s before they leave the early years settings and move into reception. What are those 3 flags, the top 3 flags that you look for?
Okay, so those 2 schools were secondary schools, but I've run a trust of 14 schools, including a number of primaries with early years settings, many of whom came to us as inadequate, Ofsted inadequate, joined the trust, and we did turn them around. They were very much in disadvantaged areas, so that's my experience is in those particularly tough areas. But what I would say, early literacy and numeracy, and that's why I'm really keen. Nadeem Zahawi has come out strongly for literacy and numeracy straight away, because that's right the way through. So early literacy and numeracy, really important. So much that nurseries and preschools can do to help children with their speech and language development, get them ready for learning to read, learning numbers through play. You can really see the impact of great nursery and early years provision in primary education. That's why I'm so respectful. The impact is massive. Social and emotional preparation also vital, and I think this is where I'd say we need to be able to identify children falling behind developmentally early and get them additional help. It can't be right, as I've seen, that kids are, children are turning up to primary school still in nappies or unable to sit still, without families having received any support to tackle these problems. So I think two things. That's why I say the family hubs work, particularly in the disadvantaged areas, could be game changing, but there's nothing as good as brilliant early years education as well. So I think for every child, that literacy, numeracy, readiness for school is key. But particularly for the most vulnerable, I think it's working together so we can pick the issues up and deal with them straight away.
Yeah, I just want to ask you about nurseries where they're embedded within the school. But just before that, Sue Bolt from Devon Early Years said, in relation to the family hubs, aren't they just the resurrection of the Sure Start children's centres? I mean, having been part of Andrea Ledsam's Early Years Commission, the answer to that is categorically no. But I wondered if you'd like to comment on that question, Rachel.
Yeah, I think, look, I mean, I've been around since Sure Start days, and I've seen, and I've also been very involved with Andrea on the Family Hubs work. And I mean, what a mission she's been on. And I can tell you that there's no arrogance in the sense that I think she has really studied and that team have really studied and tried to learn the lessons of Sure Start and make sure that the new offer is going to both solve any issues that were there. I mean, particularly, I think, Sure Start, solving issues and the vision is greater. So I think the world is different now. So the online side of the offer in the new Family Hubs programme is really, really interesting. And I think that idea of the Family Hubs being open 24/7, having access to the right personnel, whether that's early help, whatever. I think that openness and that focus and targeting, particularly the vulnerable, are two pretty unique things. I mean, we could talk at length about the Better Start ideas and the first 1,001 days, but I think they are distinct. But that's no disrespect to Sure Start, that was a really strong thing in its day. But I think this is a new model and really ambitious. Her 6 teams are pretty amazing.
Rachel, do you have a view on nurseries that are within school sites? So, I have one in my constituency, and I've heard from other colleagues about this, where schools are now needing extra space for their catch-up provision, and that is then putting a squeeze on the early years provision. One in mine actually had to close because of that trade-off that was going on. And I just wondered if you have a view, because it is obviously a very distinct part of the earlier sector is those that are within a school site. I wonder if that's come up at all in your work so far.
So, I mean, it's come up in my experience because I've both had private nurseries on my own school sites and had my own school nurseries on the school site. And I think it's, I haven't heard of an issue like that. I think most primary heads would tell you that they massively value the nursery provision in terms of getting kids ready for school, for formal schooling. So as well as the wider things. And if anything, my view, what I'm going to be doing is hopefully trailblazing on behalf of everyone here, delivering such fantastic early education, whether it's private provision, whether it's others, to make sure that every school is connected with its early years provision, is supporting it. It's it's got to be a top priority. And maybe we need to go see that school, Steve, in your constituency and show them the evidence that in terms of the impact that where they're going to put their pound and support, if they're wanting their children to achieve, early years is where to do it. We actually have evidence for it.
Well, I might well take you up on that offer. I mean, interesting.
I'll come. I'd love to come and talk to you.
The statutory obligation to provide an early years on that site, and there are many, many other examples of it, is now being carried through, and they're retendering for the provision. But I've heard it in others. Jackie Musgrave had a question. which is kind of linked to this in some ways. Would you support bringing early education into the state system, as in Scandinavian countries, instead of preschool education being largely in the PVI sectors? Controversial. Discuss.
Oh, I don't think I think I'd need to look further, both at the system she's referring to and compare it to ours. I've always been a fan. My personal sort of experience as an educator has been as an academy's trailblazer, a reformer, as someone who set up one of the first trusts, and I've always, as an educator, enjoyed the freedoms to create the provision that's needed. So I've always been a fan of diversity in the system. I think we're I think maybe some of the feelings about wanting to move to complete state provision might be around just how difficult it's been during lockdown and coming out of lockdown. So that financial pressure. But I think what we learnt as educators, you know, of sort of 4 to 18-year-olds, that actually the places that fared best there were the places that formed families or groups of provision, because then you're able to have the back office and the support. So rather than necessarily moving into state provision, I would probably, I don't think that's necessary. I think it's probably about what are the support networks, the family, the group, the scale, the size that you're able to work out to give yourself enough protection and support to be able to deliver to weather the storms. Who could have planned for a pandemic, but also to be able to provide the provision that's wanted. So I've always been a fan of a mixed economy.
Yeah, well, when we certainly have that, of course, we have to maintain the PBIs and the state provision. A couple of questions about SEND, which I know you care passionately about, as we all. Only 90% of local authorities say they have enough provision for children with SEND in the early years. Do you think there is value in tracking not just overall sufficiency of provision, but also specifically the availability of provision for children with SEND? And sort of linked to that, another question, what can be done to remove the barriers facing children with SEND in the early years settings? Your thoughts on SEND?
Yeah, so I'm working on the SEND review at the moment, and making sure that early years is very much part of the agenda of that thinking as well, because the sooner we get the right provision for children, the better, and the sooner we, whatever. Now, I'm on SEND. I suppose what I look at is where is the system, the whole system, the school system, going to be in the next 5 years, the education system? If we look ahead, rather than, we actually see a picture, I think, of families of schools and providers working together in areas. I'd like that to go even wider, to ensure that SEND provision, alternative provision, actually, and specialist SEND provision are actually embedded in those partnerships and families of schools, so that there's great local provision for every child from early years onwards, but also it's well planned. So it's, and children can move within and out that specialist provision as they need it in a local family of schools. So I've got, I do think all of us are teachers of SEND, all of us who are teachers, we're all, and I absolutely believe in that inclusive vision, but I do think there does need to be enough specialist capacity, and that specialist capacity needs to be able to be used and shared, in local areas. So looking at where the system's going, I would definitely be thinking about embedding that in families and groups of schools, whatever they may be. We've got the multi-academy trust model, we've got schools coming together in federations in different ways, we've got early years providers coming together in different ways. I think there's also something about defining the roles in the system in the local authority. Who should actually be holding the system, holding the provision accountable, who should be holding the budgets, and who should actually be delivering the provision. And I think we need to get those questions answered and sorted right from early years through, so we can, deliver Yeah, I want a world-beating SEND system. I think we've got a chance to really do it. I'm really excited about it.
This is great to hear. Okay, so we've had a bit of a fireside chat ourselves. I'm going to open it up now to some others who want to put their questions directly to you as opposed to through me. So Lord Brownlow, very welcome. If you want to unmute yourself and ask your question to the Children's Commissioner, then Danny Kruger MP, colleague of mine, and then Neil Leach, the aforementioned legend that is Neil, will be asking. So Lord Brownlow, you have the floor.
Hello, Steve. I didn't actually. I just wanted to acknowledge that I'm here. This is my first APPG meeting for this group. It's the I'm in 2 APPGs, and it's something I'm looking to focus on in the House of Lords. So I'm working with Catherine MacLeod on SEND, particularly with her charity, which is in my sort of constituency area. So I'm very pleased to join you and listen to this extraordinary need in our communities.
Indeed, indeed. Well, thank you. And the more that you can raise these issues in the upper house, the better. We just need to increase the footprint of more and more people talking about early education and early years educators as being just that. My mission is to challenge this perception that so many have, Lord Brownlow, that we are dealing with, well-meaning amateurs working in early years when, as I well know because I live with one, they're early educators.
My other APPG is osteoporosis, and this year Lord Black and I, with a couple of others, have brought a number of things to the House of Lords through questions, and it's become very effective. And some of the simple things we've brought, like fracture liaison services, is really getting interest and traction. So please bear in mind that, I'm happy to raise a subject as a question and get some supplementaries and push the debate that way. We do it slightly different in the Lords than you do in the Commons. So we don't.
Yes. Fortunately for you, many things are done differently in the Lords.
We don't have to wait for a debate on the subject. We can put something down.
Bless you. Thank you. So Danny Kruger, my colleague, enjoyed you on the Westminster Hour on Radio 4 last night, Danny. I know you do lots of thinking in this space, and you've done lots of work with the CSJ, for instance. I wonder if you'd like to ask a question to the Children's Commissioner.
Well, thanks, Steve. Well, this is a very, very helpful meeting. Rachel, I want to ask you to sort of muse philosophically, if you would, on the distinction which is sort of running through this conversation. We've heard at the same time, 2 things which are true. One, that, as Steve just said, early education is a profession, one of the toughest and most important there is. And also, as you said at the beginning, families are essential. How do you, in your mind, and therefore how should we in policy, police or manage, perhaps better, or broker the relationship between the family and the professional business of early education? And how do we apportion responsibility properly? And how do we help both sides manage? Because you can see there's no clear question there, but it's just something that is always on my mind. Over to you.
Yeah, I go back to what children have told us, and the most youngest children have told us in the Big Ask, which is the importance, the absolute paramount importance of family to them both now and coming out of lockdown and for their futures. So they identified for us that when things went wrong in the family during lockdown, that was a major source of concern for them. That was a barrier. That having the support of a family was absolutely critical. And one of the things that, over 500,000, that's 6% of children in the UK from 151 different local authorities told us, was that one of their biggest priorities for the future for themselves is having a family of their own. And that even more so for kids in care and kids whatever. I'm also a great believer that our families are our first teachers, and that our families are our best teachers, and we learn so much and absorb so much from what our families do and our relationships with them, that's a really important place to support. But I use the word support carefully, and that's why, for example, I've been around the country and seen, for example, in Plymouth, where in a place called Trevi House, where mothers who had 12-week 12-week orders on them to have their children, babies taken into care, and had to go to Trevi House instead, and were being taught how to be mothers and supported to do that. Now that support felt so positive, and you could see them thrive in that context. In Leeds, I was in a family, went to see their early family work and saw how, local members of the community rather than social workers were going out to families, supporting families with young children and giving that support early. And the same in Blackpool in their Better Start work, where, NSPCC have got a fantastic program up there where they actually really listen to the parents rather than tell the parents what support they need, and then made a plan for Blackpool that was quite different from what they thought it would be when they started off, which was about opening up parks so they were safe, opening up libraries, getting dads to own them so they could take their own children to babies to learn to read with them, and those things that we know real, that early parenting should be. So I think the early help and early support side of family hub or early family work is really important, because what do we want? We want children to thrive, and we want children to thrive as part of families. And one of my big concerns is, in the public sector, we don't talk about families. We talk about, children or mother, or, we don't see children in that context. And this is why I'm so excited about the early family help and the family hub work, is because it does. And for me, the more we can do to empower parents to be good, to be able to help their children thrive as early as possible, the better it is. I mean, on early education, I don't see attention at all. I do think parents are the first teachers, no question. But that in no way for me it conflicts with the early education and early education. Goodness me, Danny, I bet you were like me. I was at 3. I was dying to go to school. My big brothers were all there. I was absolutely, that experience of early years education in all its wonder, was something I really wanted. So it's important. So I think for me, it's fairly straightforward, this one.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Okay, so Neil, open up to you, and then Jackie from the OU, and then Juno Sullivan, and then Jonathan Broadbury, just so you can be ready. And please obviously say where you're speaking from. I know, but everyone else won't. So Neil from the Early Years Alliance.
Hi, Steve. Hi, Rachel. Just to say that I didn't have a question, so I'm not sure how my name's popped up. So I'll leave it to others. Rare for me, I know.
I was going to say, it must
nice
be the
to
cold.
see you, though, Neil. Very nice.
Something's got to Neil. Right, Jackie Musgrave.
Thank you. That's such an inspiring discussion that we've had. I'd just like to talk about a profession versus being professional. I think all of our early childhood educators are professional, but they're not part of a profession which has protected entry points, minimum qualification entry, a register, a need for CPD, pay and status, and a graduate requirement for being part of a profession. And I really feel that this is an area that needs to be addressed. And I wrote earlier on in the chat box that there's more regulation about people working with animals, and that's no disrespect to animals, of course, but children are our precious youngest citizens, and they deserve the highest quality education and care that we can provide. And we know that the higher the qualifications, both in theoretical and practical aspects of qualifications, give the best chance to young children. And we've had this debate for many, many years. And we had the Nutt-Brown review, where many recommendations were made to improve qualifications and the workforce. And the other thing is, and this is not in any way to demean colleagues within settings who are working with children, because they bring a whole wealth of experience, and the early years foundation stage is really an opportunity to promote health. Just what Dame Rachel was saying about working in an integrated way. There's something like 35 principles that directly impact on making positive health contribution to babies and young children, and the knowledge and understanding through CPD and by good qualifications can help professionals to have that real early years practitioners to have that professional confidence that is conferred through the knowledge and understanding that CPD can give to them. And I forgot to say that I'm from the Open University, and so I have a completely vested interest in promoting graduate level practitioners, but I truly believe that this is a way of making our children's lives happier and therefore the world a better place. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jackie. We're going to have to be reasonably concise in our questions and our answers. Just we've just got under 15 minutes left, and we're going to close at 11:30. But Rachel,
in response to that, so I mean, I think the regulation point is one we haven't touched upon. So I think we've touched on a lot of the other points there about obviously I've been very I think we've talked very supportively about the need for CPD and a profession. I think I've been having this conversation with Dame Andrea actually about regulation and how do we check. And for me, one of the key things is whatever's done, we have to be comparing apples with apples. So I think there's something about an agreed outcomes framework and getting that bit right, and then regulation, however that might look, can follow, but we know we're actually talking about the same thing. And I think this is coming up a lot within the SEND review actually, and within any public sector provision where there's local delivery, because how do we know whether outcomes for children or delivery, how do we know how it looks across country? How do we know if we're even comparing the same thing when we're looking at very different frameworks? So I do think an agreed national outcomes framework is key.
Interesting. Okay, thank you, June O'Sullivan.
It should be yet though. I'm just at first thoughts on this. So, and I'd love to hear from. I really want to hear from the sector, and that's why I did want Neil offered to sort of start that process of getting me out to meet people. I think I really need to hear from people what's working. I mean, again, I would also say that to put that carefully within the context, we're coming out of a lockdown. And many places are still in recovery. So and are desperate, working in difficult circumstances. So I think this is something for the future.
Absolutely. Okay, June O'Sullivan.
Good morning. I'm June from the London Early Years Foundation, and it's as ever an interesting conversation. I think it's what's interesting about the whole thing is it shapes the two sort of continual issues that we face when you're framing what we do within the context of childcare infrastructure and how we deliver to enable people to work, but also how we deliver to our children who are more disadvantaged and actually need a really good input of most outstanding early years provision, of which there is, of course, a huge shortage. But it's interesting. I don't think anyone ever realized that when they went into the early years, they found themselves in what is a kind of highly political issue. For example, we can have conversations on a Monday about sustainability, child obesity, and poverty, all in the same context. And I would say that actually it's very interesting to frame some of this stuff within the sustainability goals, actually, because they touch on these big issues. But my question really is about collaboration. You're in a really privileged position, Rachel, to be able to help to weave together a more collaborative conversation. We don't have a Royal College. We don't have a sort of framework or like the British Medical Association. We don't have something that holds us together, no matter whether we're private, voluntary, social enterprise or childminding. And we kind of need to think about that. And I wondered whether the Royal Foundation was moving towards that when they started their big conversation. And I work with them, and I'm very happy to work with them because they're very interesting. But so my question to you again is, how do you think in your very privileged role to actually help to collaborate and get one kind of coherent voice that can open the door to the Department for Health, that does open the door to the Department for Employment, because we take apprentices, we employ, etc., etc. So that's really my big central question to you. And what help do you need from us to actually deliver that? Because I think that is central to our success.
Good question, Rachel.
Yeah, fantastic question. And now we're talking, aren't we? I mean, I think building the architecture of the system, so the system has a voice at the highest level, has got to be. I think that's almost like the kind of the flag going up to show the development of a mature system. And it's interesting because I was at a event with the CST, the Confederation of Schools Trust, that set up 3 years ago, and is just at that point of starting to think about building the architecture of the system, who gets the seat at the table, how that voice can maturely be taken to government and represent everybody. So I applaud the aim, although the one thing I did say to the CST at that was, and I don't think I'm breaking any confidences, was don't forget it's delivery that really gets you the seat at the table. So there is something, that never to forget where we come from in terms of it's not, these things aren't sort of worth having unless what we're really doing is delivering for the sector. So my answer is, let's discuss this. I mean, I would love an early years representative on my advisory board. So I went out and we went out to seek members of the advisory board. We didn't get, although we got people with early years experience and they are on the board, no specific sector colleague put themselves forward. So I've kept a place, and I'd very much like to get someone from early years on so that they can actually start to have those discussions where we're having them about other parts of the sector. So I mean, I'm as happy to do as much or as little as collaboratively as the sector wants on this one. And I think we should have further conversations.
Thank you very much. Jonathan Broadberry.
Hi, morning, and thank you for speaking to the group. I think everyone's found it really interesting and informative. I'm from National Day Nurseries Association, so we represent thousands of providers and also a network of about 15,000 practitioners. It was just picking up on a couple of things where you talked about families being at the heart of policy, and whether you think that we should be looking at that from the childcare and the funded childcare policy, because there's a number of government initiatives there, from tax-free childcare to funded hours, especially for the 2-year-olds, where take-up isn't always what maybe the government might hope it would be, or what we want to see for those children it's aimed to support. So do you think that there's a piece of work to be done there about how we make that system more accessible for families, so that it does boost that support to children? And then secondly, tagging on a little bit there, we've done a piece of work about engaging with children in the very earliest years, alongside our members in Scotland. And it'd be really interesting to have a discussion with you about that, because you're obviously really committed to engaging with children and getting their views. So we'd love to be able to sort of talk to you about that as well, and go through the work we've done there.
So second question first. Yes, please. I very, very much like to. So although our survey, the Big Ask survey, was really a 4 to 18, a survey wouldn't be an appropriate model. And although we did engage and make sure we visited lots of settings, we did work really hard at thinking how to best engage to capture that voice at that early age. So I'd love any thoughts or advice from you or anyone else in the sector. So please, my team are online and they'll be taking details, and please do get in touch. Now, your first question is a complex one. I think what's needed is a wider look at the whole of the early years as a policy agenda. So I think we need to think about what the key policy priorities are for the early years. So I know other areas of government are thinking about impact of childcare costs on parental incomes, about maternal working patterns. But as Children's Commissioner, what I'd like to see is a kind of strategic approach to the early years that joins up health and education, support with the ultimate goal of ensuring all kids get the best start in life, and can transcend disadvantage and be ready to succeed at school, by the time they get there. So I think my answer is yes, we need a good look at the policy areas, and whilst recognizing the whole policy area, whilst recognizing others in government are picking up some of those areas from different perspectives, I don't think they should be out of scope. I think we should look at the whole picture.
Okay, thank you very much. Sara Bonetti, probably the last question.
Thank you. I'm Sara Bonetti, Director of Early Years at APPG, and you're leaving to an Italian, the task of being concise. So I'll say one word, and that's play, which came up in the survey. Yeah. And my question to you is, so we hear from parents about play, you will hear a lot from early years practitioners about play before the pandemic and even more now. You hear it a lot at international level. There's plenty of evidence about play-based learning, not just for early years, but also for older group of children. And it seems like that in England, we do it backwards instead. I feel like the evidence is not trickling down at policy level. And I wonder if you had any thoughts on how to move the needle on that front.
Yeah, so great question. And I think that's perhaps because, and I mean, we haven't got time to do an entire romp through the policy background, the policy of early years since 1968. But I mean, I think probably we've been in the last few years on a pendulum swing that's been about education, the education team in government trying to raise standards, and particularly to raise standards to ensure that the most disadvantaged can achieve, to close a disadvantage gap. And I totally understand why that pendulum swing has happened, right? So, and in lots of ways, I've been very supportive of it, particularly in my roles as a sponsored academy principal and working on sort of the East Coast, in Yarmouth, in Thetford, in places like that. I wanted to ensure that my children could, in the most disadvantaged areas, could achieve as well as any children anywhere. I think that education ministers have wanted to ensure that England's children can achieve as well as any internationally, and we don't need to rehearse all the OECD PISA issues. But however, I think we have a new team. So we have a new set of ministers. We have an Education Secretary of State who was a children's minister. And I think we have the confidence and experience now, I think, to be able to say, play is important and we can learn in very different ways. It's no surprise to me that of those 557,000 responses from England's children, play was the most important word. I think what we need are people like you, Sarah, and EPI and others to be bringing that evidence base that you've got to the fore and bringing the confidence back to be able to handle these things, and for us to be able to challenge things like the inspectorate and others, where challenge interpretations of what they're asking of us, and challenge where perhaps inspector variation means that we have people who've had really negative experiences, and therefore the messaging is that this isn't what we should be doing. So nothing more important than play. Even though I love my phonics and we love reading, but I have a 26-year-old who was 2.5 once, and I know, we know how young children learn and thrive, and play is critical. So I mean, it's that balance, isn't it? I tried to give you a complex answer there. That recognises both sides, but up to you to get us the evidence there.
Thank you, Rachel, and that's a perfect note to end, because I note from what I get from you is passion, enthusiasm, and the evidence. And I love the fact that you started your remarks by saying that you did your big survey first, and you started by listening to the children, and that's exactly what I think we would want to hear from you, and exactly what I think ministers would expect to hear from you. And I can only say to those listening that I think you have an incredibly strong Secretary of State in Nadeem, and I think you have somebody who is incredibly committed to this agenda. And so thank you for taking the time this morning for what was a really interesting discussion. And I'm really, really grateful to your time. This will be available online for people to watch back who are busy working and doing the early years at the coalface right now, when they're in their darkened room later on this evening. If they want to listen to this back, they can do so. Our next all-party group meeting will be on the 14th of December. So I'd like to thank everyone for listening, obviously for Rachel for giving up her time, and to my colleagues. And we will see you next time. Thank you.